What happened to Amy?
That story just doesn't make any sense.
Did you kill Amy?
Cold Case Talk. Together we take unsolved homicides and disappearances one step further.
Welcome to Cold Case Talk. I'm Kara Porter, co-founder of the Utah Cold Case Coalition.
And I'm Tom Harvey, another co-founder.
And I'm Jana Kay. I'm a volunteer executive member of the Cold Case Coalition.
This is our first attempt at a video podcast, and it's also the first time that we have recorded here. This is our DNA lab. The Utah Cold Case Coalition, in addition to ground penetrating radar, and you're going to hear about draining a pond to find a body in this episode. In addition to all of that other work that we do, we founded our own forensic DNA lab. We are accredited, and we now offer the most comprehensive range of forensic DNA testing in the country, including we are the only lab that offers accredited forensic SNPs. Most people would think of that as covering things like whole genome sequencing, the type of testing that solved the Golden State Killer case. We are the only lab that offers that is accredited. And so this is our lab behind us. It's going to be mentioned in upcoming episodes. Today's episode, Finding Amy, is about Amy Westreicher. Amy went missing in the Roosevelt, Utah area in 2010. Her case went cold, but a friend of Amy's never gave up. And that's how we got involved in this case to begin with. One of the things that we do at the Utah Cold Case Coalition is we look for cases that haven't been publicized a lot or that we don't see recent activity on. And we try to boost interest and see if anybody has new information. One of the cases that we identified was Amy Westreicher. And so we put together a post. I think on this one we just did the Facebook. On some of them we sometimes would do a billboard or something. But this one we did a Facebook post about Amy and her disappearance. And then we boosted it. It's an interesting phenomenon that in cases originating from kind of rural areas, they tend to be our most popular Facebook posts. They get circulated a lot. They get a lot of local interest, and that's exactly what happened here. So we put together a post about Amy, with a photograph, some information about her background, and we boosted it to the Roosevelt, Utah area. And we got a phone call. And that phone call was from someone you're going to hear a lot from in this episode, because it's people like this that keep these cases alive, and that can help solve these cases, can help find missing people. And so today's episode really focuses on a friend's search for a friend.
Amy grew up in California. So sometime in the late 2000s, she moved to Roosevelt, Utah. Amy had some problems.
Once in a while, she had some interactions, with the legal system.
Amy had a few minor drug charges against her, and she did start hanging around with people who also were into that drug culture in that area.
So after we boosted this post, we didn't have to wait long. Within a day or two, we had some messages from people that thought maybe they might have seen her at different times. And then all of a sudden, we had a phone call from someone who said she had information about this case. And she did. The last time Amy Westreicher had been seen alive was in this woman's camper on property owned by this woman's brother. And not only was she one of the last people to see Amy, but she had information on what happened to Amy after they separated. The woman you're about to hear from is Connie Case. She still lives in the area. And yet she didn't mind going public with this, naming names, because she wants to see justice for Amy. Connie described to us, she described the camper. And if you're a local crime historian, you'll recognize the name of the former owner of the camper, which was John Pinder. John Pinder is a notorious murderer who was convicted of a couple of pretty gruesome murders in that area and is suspected of several other murders in the area. It just so happens that she had bought the camper from the Pinders, and maybe it was after he went to prison, I don't know. This camper was out on her brother's property, and it's important for people to realize that this wasn't like a trailer court or anything like that. This camper was basically out in the middle of nowhere.
I'm familiar with the Roosevelt, Duchesne County area because I actually lived there for a while, and I really did enjoy it while I was there. Roosevelt and the Duchesne County Vernal area is known for the oil and gas industry. So in Utah, it's located in the eastern part of Utah, and you will see oil trucks going up and down the roads all day long. And there are oil wells pumping oil all throughout the land and the county in that area. So a lot of the families that are in that area work for the oil and gas industry. So if you can imagine being out in a desert area with some plateaus and the Uinta Mountains in the background, but it is just all dirt.
Right. I mean, it's basically, it's now kind of being looked at for possible development, but basically this was just out in the middle of nowhere. It was a great place to hide, and Connie says that's what they were doing. There were 4 people in that camper. There was Amy. There was Dan Burfield. There was a guy named Skippy and a woman named Sandy.
Daniel Burfield was one of my really good friends at the time, and he started dating Sandy. First, he used to date Amy, and then they broke up, and then several months later, he started dating Sandy, which Sandy was Amy's best friend. So when he went to stay at the camper, the girls went and stayed with him, along with another guy I was letting stay in my camper.
Dan was hiding out. Connie told us that he had some warrants at the time, and we verified that. So he had asked her if he could just kind of lay low in her camper, and she said, sure, why not? So this was a group that knew each other, had known each other for a long time in a lot of contexts, and she was happy to just let him hang out. And Connie will explain, but she didn't necessarily want them. I mean, this was her brother's property. She didn't want them doing a whole lot of having a high profile or anything like that. Connie saw Amy the night before she went missing. During that first phone call from Connie, she said, I know what happened to Amy Westreicher. I can tell you exactly where it happened, when it happened, and what happened. The night before, Connie goes out to the camper.
But we were up trying to help him fix his truck, and we left about 2 o'clock in the morning with Kathy Wahlberg. We all left at the same time. We came back at 8 o'clock in the morning to continue helping with his truck, and Amy wasn't here. And I just randomly said, where did Amy go? And they said, she went back to Mighton to shower.
Because remember, this is out in the middle of nowhere. There are no facilities. I think they had a generator, didn't they? Where they were able to generate a little bit of electricity, maybe for a TV or a small TV or something, but there was no water or anything out there.
Right, there was no running water at the camper they were in.
Yeah. So it made sense. If you're going to shower, you're going to have to go do it somewhere else. Connie started to wonder about Amy. Amy didn't show up. She didn't see her. Connie went back out to the camper. There was Amy's phone. There was Amy's purse. She saw blood in the camper. And where was Amy's dog?
That's when I really started questioning them. And she did not walk out of here. Sandy said, well, she walked over to the Mexicans over here and she used their phone to call Chris. I said, okay, let's go. Let's go ask him. She said, oh, I'm sorry. That was a dream. That's right. That was a dream. I just dreamed that. And so I just kept asking, and for several months, just kept asking and drilling and asking questions.
I think she got several different answers. You know, one of the responses was that she went to Sandy's house to take a shower. Later on, the explanation changed that maybe that Amy had taken off during the middle of the night and was angry over a fight and started walking home.
And that blood in the camper, that was, she was told, was from one of the dogs that were in there that had given birth.
That's what they said. And I think that the story that was repeated the most was that she had gotten angry and had decided to just walk. And that struck Connie as really weird.
I talked to Connie on the phone, and she laid out the whole story, all of the details to me. And then we as a group decided to go out to Roosevelt, to Duchesne County, and look at the site.
We spent a lot of time out there. Connie's story resonated with us. We verified as much as we could through records, through et cetera. And we decided at one point we needed to go out there and look around ourselves.
So the three of us went out there, and it's from Salt Lake City, it's what, 4 hours?
Yeah, we did go out there. It's a couple-hour drive, and we went out there and met with Connie and her husband.
And she pointed out to us where things had sat, where the camper was, and other features of that landscape.
And just as a side note, I remember when I put signs on all the poles for everyone to follow to get out to the site, because there are no address signs along the road. It is turn left here, go 2 miles, turn right, turn another right, and then you hit the dirt roads, and then it's turn right, turn left, go 2 blocks this way and that way. I put stakes in the ground with signs so everybody could follow. I think I did a good job because everybody got there.
And if it hadn't been for that, I'd still be driving around Roosevelt, because literally these, when you call them roads, they're barely roads. But once, frankly, when we were all there, it did make it obvious that the story about Amy just choosing to walk somewhere in the middle of the freezing night made no sense whatsoever. Even now, where they've actually started to build a few places out there, I think it was still a mile, wasn't it, before we even got to a crossroad?
It was all dirt roads. And also keep in mind that this happened in wintertime. So it was icy cold. I've been out there in the cold temperatures of the Uinta Basin, and it is freezing cold. And so it just wasn't logical that Amy took off in the middle of the night, scantily dressed, in the cold winter of the Uinta Basin, Roosevelt area.
Well, and then at one point they said, well, maybe she went over. There was one other family, I think, that lived at the time in kind of nearby, and of
Mexican origin.
They just called them the Mexicans, is what they said. And they said, well, maybe she went over there, maybe they gave her a ride or something. But we actually tracked down that family that lived there at the time, and with the help of a translator, which we appreciated, they were able to confirm that they had not seen her, hadn't heard from her. This story was complete news to them.
Who would pick her up? No one. No
No.
one would pass in the middle of a cold night in January.
No, but see, we didn't necessarily realize that until we saw it for ourselves. That's one reason why we do try to visit crime scenes, because sometimes you'll look at it and you'll say, oh, holy cow, that's physically impossible, or no wonder he couldn't see what really happened. And it was obvious to us from minute one that the walking story made no sense. And then we verified it.
I have to agree that story just doesn't make any sense.
Connie had always thought it was strange, the story about Amy leaving, etc., but it didn't really hit her until she had her own personal tragedy. Connie's son died, and then she was approached by someone who told her about a dream that this woman had had. When did it occur to you that something might be wrong or might have been wrong?
It wasn't until the conversation after my son died.
And who was that with?
Kathy Wahlberg. She didn't come to my son's funeral, and then she just kind of disappeared. Probably about 2 weeks after he died, she came over to my house and she was really upset. She said she was having dreams. She was having dreams about my son out in the desert, she said. And he was trying to lead her to a grave. He kept saying, come on, come on, come on. And I'm just thinking, okay, she's just a little kooky. Sandy said, oh, do you think she's trying to show her Amy? And that's when I went, what? And I said, what happened to Amy? One of my first response was, did you kill Amy? No. And then Dan said, do you think she's dead? That was his response. Do you think she's dead? And that was just, okay, I knew something had happened to her out here. I said, where is Amy?
You know, it's interesting because when I was first looking for cases that I felt needed to be looked at a little bit more closely, I reached out to Sandy. Sandy had posted on a missing persons page about how much she missed Amy and thought about her every day. And I thought, you know what? This is a good outreach. We want people who can tell us about the person that we're looking for. You know, what were they like? What was their sense of humor like? You know, just make this person a human, or make this person individualized. So I reached out and just said, would you have 5 minutes just to talk with us about what Amy was like? And I received back a message that essentially said, no, I am done talking. Do not contact me again. And I will admit that was one reason this case got moved up the list, because that didn't make any sense to me. But frankly, it does make sense when you hear what Connie has to say. And you remember when I mentioned earlier that some people had commented that the picture of Amy looked like somebody that maybe this person had seen. And a relative of Sandy's posted on there, Amy's not coming back. The whole thing was weird. And that's one reason why we focused on this case.
There was another incident that raised Connie's suspicions too. The man named Skippy, who had been in the trailer that night, approached her soon after Amy's disappearance and asked if he could stay at her place. And the reason, he told Connie, was that he was afraid of Dan, that Dan might kill him.
Skippy would have been the perfect witness to interview for us investigating this case. But unfortunately, at the time that this case came to our attention, Skippy had already passed away.
But Connie never gave up. She knew something had happened to Amy out at that camper. She knew Dan and Sandy were not telling the truth. She wanted to know. She wanted to find Amy.
And so I just kept asking, and for several months, just kept asking and drilling and asking questions until Dan finally told me that he choked her. They got into an argument about Sandy and Amy. Amy was Dan's ex-girlfriend. Sandy's the new girlfriend. And the girls started fighting, and Amy wouldn't shut up. She was just so annoying, he said. And so I threw her down on the bed and I started choking her. I realized what I was doing and I let her go. And that's why she got angry and walked out of the camper with her dog. That didn't make sense to me. I said, then why did you lie to me? Why'd you lie and say she was over there? Because I just know how it looks.
But that wasn't all. Sometime after Amy disappeared, Connie said she had a conversation with Skippy and pressed him to tell her what he knew about that night. He wouldn't budge, but finally he allowed her one question. Was Amy still out there on her brother's land, out in the desert? Skippy said, yes.
Did you ever talk with anybody about where Amy might be buried? Like, did you talk to Dan or Sandy?
Oh,
or
yes.
anybody?
Sandy and Dan would come out here all the time because one of their theories was there's a lot of cougars out here. Maybe a cougar got her. She had her dog. You don't roam around here in the middle of the night. So maybe a cougar got her. All right, well, let's go look. We would come and we just kind of roam these hills or wherever just to see if we could find clothing, any signs, her dog, anything. And but they came out here all the time to help find her. And Dan would always just tell me, he'd say, oh, there's an oil well back here. And he always would tell me, I think she might be over by the oil well. Well, why do you think that? I don't know. I just have a feeling she might be by the oil well. So we stayed away from the oil well because he's not going to tell me that if I'm going to go look for her.
And then Connie, at that point, had pointed out a couple of areas where she believed, and the police had actually suggested to her at one time, that Amy's body may have been hidden.
And you know, it made sense what some of her theories were. I mean, she knew her brother's property. And one of the areas there was, well, first of all, we had to do some research because there were pigs at one time. And we had to do some research. Unfortunately, with the swine flu, some people got rid of their little pig farms. But pigs, as we're going to discuss in a subsequent podcast, pigs are an excellent body disposal method. And so we had to figure out, could the pigs have still been in that area? And if so, could she have been disposed of in that way?
Connie also did mention that her father owned the pigs and that he had dug a pit that was located close to the trailer on his land. At the time, just before Amy had disappeared, the pit was there next to the trailer. And so that came up as a suspicious...
A possible place where Amy's body could have been disposed because it would have been easier to dig up the soil in that area that already had been disturbed.
Well, I mean, that's part of the thing. Even when we were out there, that's why we had to, the digging is not easy out there. And of course it's frozen ground. But one thing that wasn't frozen also was a nearby pond. And Connie had raised the possibility of a person could throw somebody or throw a body into that pond area.
She described it as 15 to 20 feet deep. And so her thinking was that it would have been an easy place or easier place to dispose of somebody rather than trying to dig in that hard ground.
Yeah, because it wasn't completely frozen. And so that was a possibility. So the way we looked at it after we did our research and things like that is we needed a cadaver dog for the pig area and some other surrounding areas. And we needed to drain that pond. And that's what we did.
So we tried to arrange for a backhoe to come in and start digging on the pond. And Connie's brother actually owned some equipment. And we were able to easily arrange for Connie's brother to bring that.
I don't think he thought it was easy.
We arranged.
It was easy. Arranging it was easy. But
arranging it was easy, but digging it
was
a challenge.
Getting it unstuck and everything really admired the job that Connie's husband did. He
Yeah.
really came through for us. But that was on the pond. That was when we were draining. Which one? I think we actually we started the pond draining. We started to plan the draining of the pond. Okay, we went out there several times. First, we had the cadaver dog because we didn't necessarily want to drain that pond if we didn't have to. And the ground penetrating radar, we did that the first time or the second time?
That was the second time. That was at the same time that we were excavating the pond. We took the ground penetrating radar and covered a piece of ground where the trailer used to sit. So we went back and forth in sections with the ground penetrating radar, trying to find some type of disturbance underneath the ground.
So, yeah, the first things, the cadaver dog and the ground penetrating radar to see if we can find something in the area. And we were very grateful to Jennifer for bringing her cadaver dog up from Price to help us with that. Interestingly, we had actually contacted a group of cadaver dog handlers from another state, but that was actually closer, much closer. And they wouldn't do it because their dogs would get muddy. And so we were very grateful that Jennifer was able to make that work for us. So we did a thorough cadaver dog search, no results. Ground penetrating radar in the area where the camper was did not produce any results. So we started to plan draining of the pond. Draining a pond is something I had no familiarity with of any kind. I am a lawyer. So I asked my brother if he wouldn't mind helping out on something because he has like an engineering mind. He can figure out how to do stuff even if he's never done it before. And he's like, oh, okay, sure. And then after he had committed, I said, great, it's a few hours away and it's in the heat of the sun. We're going to drain a pond weekend after weekend. But he did it.
Describing the pond, it's about 15 feet across and about 30 feet long. And this pond, at the time that we started digging, was filled with reeds. So it wasn't a clear pond. You couldn't really see a lot of water. It was just filled with reed after reed. So it was pretty compact, and the dirt had risen up in it, in the pond. It was very dense.
That's true. I mean, if you wouldn't even know it was a pond except for the fact that how in the world in this desolate area is there all of a sudden all of these reeds? And, and after we did the planting, I mean, he had to go through and do some basic configurations. He had to take at it with a machete. You could almost walk on the reeds sometimes. They were so thick. That was one of the hardest physical activities that we've ever done.
And there was also a chainsaw out there too, used to cut down those reeds because they were really stiff too. So the backhoe kind of burst the dam that was creating the pond, and the water started to drain out, but you still couldn't see anything because of the reeds or anything like that.
It was extremely difficult to walk through the reeds. It was slow moving and one step pulling up from the mud and taking one step and then pulling the next foot up from the mud and clearing the reeds, pushing them back so you could make a path through them. It was very difficult to maneuver through them. And once some of the reeds were cut down, some of the volunteers that were there fell back on the reeds just to relax and have a rest. And so you can tell that it was so dense that somebody could sit down on top of the pond that was matted down by the cut reeds.
It was amazing. When the water started flowing, and I actually will tell this cautionary tale. The water starts flowing. My brother, with his engineering mind, says, that water is going to head straight for those temporary houses down there. And so we grabbed shovels and we did we were digging these little emergency trenches to send the water not into these people's basements, And then, of course, I did call our executive director and said, let's talk about liability insurance. If you're going to do stuff like this, you've got to have liability insurance.
Yeah.
By the way, anyone listening, you can get defamation insurance for like $12 a year. Just saying.
Sign me up.
Yeah. Now, this was a logical place to look. Amy she talked about a couple of other experiences. There was another area that we were going to look in. Frankly, we got shut down by COVID and had to cut back on our activities and couldn't travel most places, and everybody knows about that. But that place was a place where Connie and her husband had gone to meet Dan and Sandy.
This was one of those times when Connie and her boyfriend, now husband, and were out searching for Amy's body with Dan. According to them, Dan always carried a firearm. They had done this before, but this particular time, Connie and Jason felt something was wrong. They wondered whether Dan intended to murder them. Spooked, they got out of there as quickly as they could.
Remember that now? Yes,
it
we
was
felt
not
like
a
we were
fun
in
night,
danger that
'cause
night,
it was-
and that's the night I just yelled and screamed with them.
They was doing
Yeah, and that
digging
was
a
it.
pipeline
Yeah.
over there or something.
Okay.
I remember big, giant trenches and
Yeah.
pipe laying out there. Just
To
putting in a
bury
pipeline
bodies.
over that way.
To bury
Yeah.
bodies.
Something.
I
It
do
just
recall
didn't
that
feel
now.
right. Yeah.
And
Now
we
that she
both
said
felt
it,
like
it don't.
we both felt like that we were in danger and we needed to get out of there.
Yeah.
Well, not only Connie, but some other friends of Amy's were suspicious about her disappearance. In about August of 2010, the police were contacted by a friend of Amy's, and he was concerned that no one had heard from her, not he or her mother, who lived in California. He had heard about a Jane Doe, unidentified Jane Doe in Wyoming. And so he contacted the police and asked them to pursue this lead and see if it had been Amy.
And it was not. And the case then languished for years and years.
It really did. But it didn't languish with Connie. I mean, she had this information, and in her heart, she felt to be true. It had been told to her by someone who was a close friend, and she just wasn't going to let this go.
I really enjoyed getting to know Connie because she was very dynamic and had a lot of passion for finding the truth. She was unafraid of confronting other friends of Amy's and asking the hard questions. Where was Amy? Why has she disappeared? That doesn't make sense. I saw blood. And so she put the questions out in a very straightforward way to her friends, Amy's friends that were there that night, to find the answers that she was seeking, because she knew that something was wrong.
Where we ended it, when the pandemic finally shut down our efforts, we had been looking for Amy's body out in the Roosevelt area. We had another area we were going to search, but we couldn't have we were going to actually advertise and get a large group in the town to help. And of course, couldn't have groups at the time. And there's a reason why we are recording this podcast right now. And that's because Amy Westreicher has been found. She was found recently by someone who was out surveying. You know, this area eventually is going to get developed, right? And someone was out surveying relatively near where we were looking, within a mile, and came across human remains. They were above ground, and those have been confirmed to be Amy Westreicher.
Dan actually told Connie that one day a hunter would run across the remains of Amy.
And so where is Dan? Where is Dan Burfield?
He left town shortly after this.
He, not only did he leave town, but there have been some events at which you would normally expect someone to attend. For example, his own son's funeral. And Dan didn't show up. Another relative's funeral. Dan didn't show up. Dan, he has a 10 or 12-year-old drug warrant. So Dan is not hiding out because he's got an old drug warrant. There is a reason why Dan Burfield has disappeared off the face of the earth. We have done a lot of searching for Dan Burfield. We don't have any reason to think he's dead. We have resources that we think we would know if he had died. So we're thinking that he probably moved out of state and might have changed his name, might be using, his middle name, or just have completely fabricated entirely new identification papers. He might have gone to work in the same area that, the same type of work he had before. And so I think what we'll have to do is, obviously, this is going to be a homicide investigation now. We don't interject ourselves into active homicide investigations. We typically wait until it's been at least 3 years. But at some point, the police are going to start looking for Dan Burfield, and if they don't find him, we will. We'll get his picture out there. There are certain places where I think he's more likely to have gone than others just based on his occupation. And Dan Burfield will need to come back, and he'll need to face his longtime friend Connie and maybe get this off his chest. The description of what happened to Amy, he might be able to work out a deal with the prosecutor or something.
Even Connie doesn't think that the murder was pre-planned or premeditated. She thinks it might have been just accidental in the heat of the moment when they were all arguing and fighting and mad at each other.
And also under the influence of possibly alcohol, possibly drugs at the moment, late at night. And then there were some disagreements about girlfriend-boyfriend issues, and who know what could erupt at that moment.
Yeah, a lot of people, things eat away at them, and then when they come forward, they realize that they still have the rest of their lives in front of them. And so if anyone here has any information on where Dan Burfield might be, it's actually in his best interest too, because right now people are thinking the worst.
So in the end, we give Connie the last word.
It's tragic. It's really tragic, and no mom should not have to wonder where their babies are.
If you have information about this or any other unsolved homicide or missing person case, now is the time to speak up. You can contact us on our website at coldcasetalk.com or call the Cold Case Coalition's confidential tip line at 385-CLUE-313. That's 385-258-3313. Let us know what you think of the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Cold Case Talk. By subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing this podcast with others, you help us keep these cases in the light.
So we'll give Connie the last word.
It's tragic. It's really tragic, and no mom should not have to wonder where their babies are.